Hello and welcome to Burgundy Unpicked, backed by a very sort of semi-popular demand. Here we are to charge through the new Burgundy en primeur campaign. And as usual, I've certainly almost always got our head of buying, Mr. Guy Seddon.
Hello, Joe. Good to be here again.
And the head of fine wine and our boss, Will Hargrave.
Afternoon, Joseph.
The boss, like Springsteen. You can go by that name now if you like.
Well, apparently.
Look, we are sort of kicking off the first of many podcasts that are going to come across through your whatever medium you use to listen to them across the next sort of 4 or 5 months. As you know, we at Corney and Barrow, we have a very sort of prolonged Burgundy campaign, but very exciting and sprinkled with lots and lots of gems. As a side note, you can actually, if you do it through Spotify, you can listen to the Wrapped and see how you got on with your Spotify minutes on certain podcasts. And we've got a few customers who have got in touch with us in the 1% club, which is quite fun. Anyway, we're back now from Burgundy. Guy has obviously been the sort of the mainstay through all of the visits, tasting, I think, thousands of wines now.
Certainly feels like it.
And I had the pleasure of being part of the last week with Mr. Brett Smith and Thibaut Mathieu, our MD from Asia. And that was a wonderful week of tasting across various different domaines and different appellations. But we're starting with Domaine Leflaive. So we always come out in December with an absolute bang. It's one of my, I think it's probably my favorite release to sell from because the range is so broad. There's something for everyone. It's, as far as I'm concerned, if probably the greatest white Burgundy domain there is, certainly up there. And that one's a debate that we could maybe have on another episode with a different theme. But do you want to? So Guy, Adam, Thibaut, and I, we were there for the big tasting, and it is a big tasting. Do you want to set the scene?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joe. So Domaine Leflaive, it's always one of our favourite tastings, as Joe says. We have started going there quite late in the afternoon / early evening. So it was 5 p.m., I think, in theory, although we didn't actually get tasting until closer to 6 p.m., I think. And it's a big tasting. So you have essentially 2 upturned barrels upon which sit 2 semicircles of wine. So one was Domaine Leflaive 2024, and the other was Esprit Leflaive, which were all of the négociant wines that they work with, plus the Domaines plural Leflaive, which is their operation in the Mâconnais. So we had all of these wines sort of confronting us as we walked into the Leflaive cellars, which were totally dark, totally quiet after a day's cellar work in the Leflaive hub. And it's just always such a sort of exciting period of anticipation before you start this tasting. And so we were there. We'd previously very briefly met Amandine Brillanceau, who is the new technical director at Leflaive. She took over from Pierre Vincent in January 2025. So she is literally 11 months into the job. She comes to Leflaive following a 7.5-year stint at Maison Louis Jadot. So she is well used to working with big ranges of wine, and she was fantastic. We had a very good introduction to her and a good chat with her before Adam and Brice came in, and we started the tasting.
Yeah, I was really impressed with Amandine because it's the first time I've met her, and it's obviously a big position to be appointed into, and huge congrats to her. But you can sort of, even spending after sort of the first 30 minutes, I could kind of see how and why, because she's done winemaking Southern Hemisphere. She's after going to sort of university to sort of study all the necessaries, and she's obviously sort of broadened her horizons and knowledge to a very, very good level. Then with Jadot, we were sort of talking about, you're obviously exposed to so much different style of terroir, and that's another sort of a big boost into your sort of learning. And they obviously got to a great level. And I really liked her as a character. She was very comfortable. Obviously, even though it was my first time meeting her, you sort of think, oh, I wonder what she's going to be like. But she's been at the Domaine almost 12 months. So she just felt very much part of the furniture already.
Yeah, agreed. So we got underway tasting, and as always, Amandine taking the place that Pierre had previously occupied in terms of pouring the wines for us. And we started with the red wines, didn't we? So we did the Esprit Leflaive wines first. and then did all of the white wines together afterwards, which is always our sort of preference when we're tasting. And we had a little bit of conversation after each wine as well, which was quite nice. So you sometimes get a sort of grilling by Brice de la Morandière, and he will say sort of, so what do you think of this? What are your thoughts on this wine? Sort of really putting you on the spot. But in the same way, he's prepared to sort of give his thoughts, and it's quite an open exchange, which is nice. We taste in silence, but then once everybody's come to a conclusion, you then have a few words on each individual wine, which was good.
Yeah, he very much sort of acts like the conductor in a way in terms of the orchestration, but it also feels like a great relationship sort of moment for me, because there's some tastings I go to and it's sort of a little bit more clinical, if you like, and you taste when you sort of scribble on notes, and we might walk away after some conversation, obviously, just about the growing season, where the market is, what the estate's up to, anything new and things. But this one very much is, like you said, a backwards and forwards. And I think that just sort of puts a spotlight on the relationship aspect that we've got with this domain. And it is very strong. And that's probably one of the reasons I enjoy it so much. Yeah. So let's talk then. Do you want to sort of say a little bit about the vintage? Because obviously, we won't go on to any reds here. We start with Esprit Leflaive, but we'll talk about that another time because it's a different vintage. We started with the 22 Esprit Leflaive, which we'll be releasing next year. So in the sort of the first half, certainly. I think we'll just talk about 24, and we'll talk about Domaine Leflaive and Leflaive Assos wines, which people will see the offer coming live.
Well, what was Assos, Joe?
Sorry, what was Assos? Absolutely, yeah. Ex-Assos, thank you. Yeah. Which should be going live on Wednesday, the 10th, yeah.
Exactly. Okay, well, I'll do a quick whiz through the growing season, and then we can take it from there. The defining characteristic, I think, of the 24 vintage in terms of the growing season is that it was quite rainy. It was quite cool, quite rainy. So I think that immediately puts you into the mindset of a sort of cooler, fresher vintage. As we will see, that's not necessarily the case with the wines. The wines do have a very pleasing degree of concentration and intensity to them. But in terms of the season itself, they had 1.5 times the usual amount of rain in Bouligny-Montrachet. So that is, taking the sort of previous 2-year average. That was where they were in terms of saturated soils. So, there was more than enough water for the vines to be working with. The point was made by Brice that there are 2 old wells at Domaine Leflaive. One is at Rue de l'Église, where the cellars are, and one is at Place du Pasquier, where the domaine buildings are. And these 2 old wells, I don't know if they're actually used anymore, but they both overflowed in the 24 vintage. Not massively so, but they certainly overflowed. So, that gives you a sort of snapshot of how much moisture there was in the soil. The next thing to say about the season is that they had some coulure at flowering. So that essentially means that it was cold and it was wet when the flowers were forming on the vines. And so not all of those flowers went on to develop into grapes. So that has an effect on quantity rather than on quality. And the quantity produced was, as we will see, essentially half the crop that they had in 23. Now, 23 was a very generous vintage. So it was a bountiful crop, and judged by that yardstick, okay, anything is inevitably going to be a bit smaller, but 24 was half the size of 23. The next challenge in the growing season was mildew. So this is downy mildew. It affects the leaves, it affects the grapes, and it affects the stems of the vine. The good news is that essentially berries that are affected by mildew tend to drop off. So you don't have too much of a nightmare in terms of sorting because the job is basically done for you. But you do have to be very on it in terms of spraying. So if you're an organic producer, you have to get out there and reapply these organic sprays the whole time. Leflaive is obviously organic and also biodynamic. And so they were very much, out there continuously in the vineyards. And the trouble with what are known as contact sprays, which are organic sprays, is that they don't go inside the vine. So they just stay on the leaves and on the grapes. And that's all very well when there's no rain. But if it starts raining immediately after spraying, you need to get straight back out there again and reapply them. So it was really a very challenging vintage in the vineyards. Fortunately, Leflaive has very, very extensive and good vineyard teams. So it wasn't an issue, but it was, you really had to be on your toes. The only other thing to say, just to illustrate the volumes, is that Chevalier Montrachet, which is one of the 4 great Grand Crus of the Domaine, was cropped at a tiny 6 hectolitres per hectare. So I think just to give you an illustration of quite how small 2024 is as a vintage, it was, well, something like 85% less than it, or smaller than it was in 2023. So, it's really, really quite small quantities that we're talking about.
Yeah, indeed. I think that volume is the first thing I'll sort of comment on. I mean, 24 is a small crop. I think everyone probably who's listening to this is aware of that through either their own sort of reading of other vintage reports or during the growing season. And with Leflaive, half of the Domaine's cuvées in the offer were more than 50% down. So that's what we're talking about. It's a real sort of savage hit. And of course, like you said, it's coulure, and then the mildew takes its effect, and then obviously sorting, because they want to make sure they're getting the most pristine fruit available. But the sort of the silver linings here are there was pristine fruit available, and that has translated into some really, really excellent wines. And there was also a genuinely lovely ripening period. Also, I should probably say a clear period. And I was actually there as well in September 24 with a group of customers pre sort of harvest. It was sort of early September. And we were there for 3 days, and 2 of them were gloriously sort of blue skies and clear. And we sort of went to sort of some of the vineyard visits, and we popped a few of the grapes into our gobs just to see what they were like. And I was expecting this to be some sort of acid attack, because you'd already read about everything that was there, and it's really sort of fierce. And they weren't. There was almost, there's an element of table grapes, not quite like that, because that's sort of, Sakrosty overload. But there was this real lovely sort of balance, which I remember commenting at the time and saying to the other guys, chaps, taste, it was Pinot that we tasted on this occasion, but taste these. And we were all sort of quite surprised, because we were fully aware of the situation with disease pressure at the time. But that fruit is on Chardonnay and Pinot has obviously taken its effect on quantity, but the quality is great. And with this tasting, there are some stunning Leflaives, and I will we'll go through the range in a bit. But I mean, my scores go all the way up to 19 plus with one of the Grand Crus, which I was just blown away by. But I think, I think as an observation, I would say with Leflaive in 24, versus maybe some other places that we'd tasted, you've definitely got the blueprint of Leflaive in there. So they have managed to sort of wrangle verve and tension into these wines. But with 24, the big surprise that I had, and this is on both sides, whether red or white, was there was this lovely concentration within the wines that I did not expect. A concentration of fruit and a level of ripeness of fruit, whilst obviously retaining these sort of high acid profiles. And that's just given to these wines, which actually there's a little bit of sex appeal about them. There is some really sort of lovely different textural styles, some being a bit more creamy, some have been a bit more oily. But with Leflaive, you've got then this sort of core of energy and focus there as well, which takes it to being unmistakably Leflaive.
So it's really not a vintage that, having not tasted, obviously that's probably why I'm here, just to sort of try and keep you on the straight and narrow. But it doesn't really compare with another vintage, particularly then, by the sounds of it. Certainly not in terms of the vineyards and in terms of the season. I mean, it sounds like it had all its own challenges, not got frost, but you've got other reasons for it being short.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my mind, I probably had 21, which I thought was a similar growing season. They're very much more concentrated than the 21s, so I would put them in a different category altogether. 2014, I think some people will reference in terms of a freshness, sort of this sense of real sort of vivid freshness that the 14s had. What I would say is that the 14s were quite austere and quite difficult to taste on primeur because of that really high acidity. I don't think you have that same perception of acidity in 2024. You've got wonderful freshness, but you've also got this, what Joe was referring to as this slightly creamier, thanks to the malolactic sort of edge to the wines and a sort of more of a density and a bite to them. They're definitely not sort of tooth-aching wines to taste.
No, indeed, yeah, because I think, several winemakers commented that fermentation has happened quite easily and quite quickly, and that's both, alcoholic and mellow. So I think everyone was sort of surprised. I mean, everyone was surprised with what the quality that was left when it came to full harvest. But I think in terms of actually once they'd gone through those 2 fermentations, what they had to taste in the barrels, and ultimately what is going to become the wine in the bottles. And I would agree. I think it does have a sense of independence as a vintage because of that slightly that quality that pulls you in, whether you want to call it a charm or a seduction. And it's definitely on the reds, and that's for a different episode altogether. But it's present with the whites as well, which kind of sort of reminds you a little bit of sort of 17 and 20, where there's a little bit more of a slight richness, but certainly a ripeness and a sort of little sucrosity. We're following 23 here, and it's so different to 23, which was all about real sort of almost hedonistic styles, where you had this weight and this plumpness that was then defined by each Domaine's style. And with Leflaive, again, like 18 had, they just chiseled that into a focus and a direction. Here, they don't necessarily have to do that as much. It's more about a poise that seems to have almost the vineyards kind of naturally found, but then you've got that real verve and vivacity that you get with Leflaive, kind of all the way through from Versay up. So yeah,
I think it's in these sort of vintages where you can really see the terroir and you can see the definition from vineyard to vineyard. Because, in a vintage like 18 or maybe 23 to an extent, you've got a slight sort of veneer of fruit, which sometimes obscures the early personality of the wine from coming through. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not the case this year at all. You can really see their character, which is great.
Yeah.
Well, which way around do you want to go through the wines? Sort of from Macon up, if you like, or from Polini down?
I don't mind. I mean, or should we go from south to north? So start with the Macon.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good idea.
And it's I think we had to sort of adjust. Well, we started with Guy sort of alluded to Esprit Leflaive, and it's 22s there. We did both whites and reds, so we had to sort of recalibrate our palettes quite quickly and go to 24. Yeah. But I think again, the with Macon Versay, I was looking at my note, and actually the first 2 lines kind of sum up what I've been saying in a way, pardon me. And it says, a very chiseled impression, lemon sorbet, then into some sort of creamy yogurt. And then it goes on to describe more. But that's just showing you that texture and acid is clearly all about it. And it gives a real sort of structured impression, certainly. Through Macon Versay, obviously we do the Chêne, Le Monte, and then onto Ige, Macon Sultre. So at those 4, I think they're really sort of true to their style, as Guy was saying previously as well about plots and
about showing their.
Yeah, I mean, I personally in this vintage, my highest score on those 4 was actually with Ige, which isn't helpful, but the first line, voluptuous and luscious for Leflaive, yet. I've said, it's wearing Spanx because it has this almost pulled in feel that the reduction accelerates through.
Right, well, we've got gobs in, and now we've got that in. I mean, it's going to need some editing, I think. Yeah.
Thank you for picking the smallest quantity as well.
Well, that's a Brett Smith move. That he adores Combat that they make sort of 2 barrels of. But when you get to the Polini.
Well, I'll do the sort of reverse, and I loved the straight Macon Versay this year actually, and I've put this in the introduction to the offer, which will be coming out on Wednesday. I thought it was the best Macon Versay that I've tasted for quite some time. There was a real vivacity and zest to it. It seems to just be full of life and energy, and I thought it was brilliant.
Well, it might be. Do you know what that might be? Because I was just thinking, it's 21st birthday. Well, it's 20th birthday, but it's 21st vintage. Obviously, starting in 04.
Yeah.
So no, it's good. It's good. I mean, it's been on cracking for so long.
We moving into sort of the more known appellations then with the Domaine side. We did an interesting exercise on the Polinis, didn't we? Where we tasted the Domaine Polini Montrachet versus Esprit, which we don't have to offer on this one, but there was a definite difference in the intensity, and this was the same vintage as 24. The intensity, I'd say, the purity of the fruit, but also again that sort of saline and energy that you get with Leflaive. The Domaine one was exceptional, and I sort of felt. I've written here, it was much more laser-like, 17.5 to 18 out of 20. So just to sort of say, look, this is the benchmark. If you want to judge this Domaine, if you're brand new to Domaine Leflaive and you're coming in potentially on this offer as a new customer to Corney and Barrow, which is, you know, a lot of you will be. You know, apologies, you're going to be sort of fighting amongst a really sort of heavily reduced offering in terms of quantities. But, you know, that one is it's quintessence, isn't it, of what Leflaive is about. It's in terms of its energy, in terms of, and then obviously coming from Pellini. But I really would like to sort of more so turn the spotlight to the Bourgogne Blanc, because I think, you know, that is and has been considered ever since I've been at Corney and Barrow as the sort of the insiders, the real gem of the domain, where you've got, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it 3 plots that go into Bourgogne?
I think it's 4.
Is it 4 now?
Yeah.
But these are all brilliantly located across, with two of them being in village, 5 plots. Yeah, with 2 of them being in certain specific villages, you know, of appellations themselves, within Pellini, Merceau, and I loved. This is a one that you're going to want to sort of buy, and you'll be able to sort of pull the cork in sort of 3 years, because it was all about elegance. And even from that sample that we had, you could just feel that sort of Pellini-esque elegance, a little bit of that white flower coming through, but just showing real refinement with an early approach. And so it's a sort of mad to sort of even sort of overlook that one in this offer.
Yeah, and I mean, those 5 plots are all in Pellini as well. So I mean, it's essentially a Pellini Montrachet, but they call it a Bourgogne Blanc. I scored those 2 wines the same, actually, the Village Pellini and the Bourgogne Blanc. I think the Bourgogne Blanc is a bargain, and it's got this stony mineral character to it. But it was coiled with high acidity. It's really textbook stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, kudos.
Before we go into the Premier Cruise, and you might find this one a bit more interesting one as well, just because it's more of a generalization. And I was going to ask Guy if you found this applied to Leflaive or not. But from all of my tasting of 24s, and I don't know if it's to do with selection, and, you know, there's a lot of people who actually declassified across many domains, and certain cuvées weren't made, and therefore some plots were blended together. And, you know, so I actually think it's a year which versus the average vintage. Okay, well, actually, let's just talk about the previous year, 23. Certainly versus 23, where village level and Premier Cruise, I think the overall quality is above what you kind of normally get in the average year. Then you get to the Grand Cru side, and I will say there was a little bit more inconsistency on overall Grand Cru presence. And what I mean by that is, and this does not apply to Leflaive at all, and we'll talk about those in a minute, because like I said, one I was blown away with. But this is as a sort of general observation. There were some domains where you thought, okay, that blind, I would be struggling to pick that as Grand Cru because of the persistency, the density, possibly the structural components of the wine.
Okay.
But at Premier Cru and Village, it's everywhere that I tasted, I was very, very impressed.
Do you think in some cases it's because people have a bit more fruit to choose from at those levels, and so you can be even more rigorous in a way with sorting?
True, because if you're dealt 4 to 7 hectolitres per hectare, or even 10 hectolitres per hectare, you're just dealing with what you have to, and you're making what is available.
Yeah.
And, you know, and if you,
but it's also wonderful that they've been able to make the wine separately rather than having to do a Premier Cru or 2 where they've amalgamated plots, because I think you know that can work, and it, obviously with a lot of domains you can totally understand why they do it, because it's better to have a meaningful amount of one wine than, you know, 5 or 6 tiny amounts. But with the domain, even in a small vintage, it's great that they can keep the whole range represented.
Agreed.
So what was one of my favourites, the Merceau, like this year?
It was really good. I mean, it's got this sort of real focus to it, and a bit of lime rind, I think, on the finish, but quite big demonstrative yellow peach fruit, I think, on the mid as well.
Oh, good. So it's proper.
It's got real personality to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case for most of the wines. They haven't pulled their punches. I didn't get the feeling that they were being overly polite, if you like, with the wine.
Or sort of steered into one. Yeah. Okay. No, that's good.
So they've gone for it.
Yeah, I think the rest of the Premier Cruise, there's all down. There is a slight sort of trend that's been bucked with Filatier was slightly. Well, we got slightly higher yields this year than previous. So that's the only sort of.
Well, it's got, ironically, if you get a vintage where you've had all of these things happen, Collioure and Mélangeage and stuff, if terroir wasn't a thing, then everything would be up or down by the same amount, because terroir wouldn't matter to a degree. So the fact that you have differences of yields from one plot to another, in a way, actually acts to accentuate the concept of terroir.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean exactly. And maybe that comes up to, well, that will play a bit of a role in the Grand Crus when we go on to that as well. I mean, my thoughts on the other Premier Crus, certainly with the Puligny Premier Crus, Clairvoyant, I just think there's been this trend of its ever increasing quality year on year.
I think people are stopping believing us with that, but it's just so true.
Yeah.
I mean, because you just, it's been punching above its lane now for getting on 10 years.
Well, let's call a spade a spade. It's got to this level now, and it's just staying at that level. It's fighting with the big boys. It's in the big league, and deservedly so. I mean, my first line here was fresh chalk. It reminds me of classroom when you bang the rubbers together and it just leaves that smell in the air. It was
going to bring people out of sort of PTSD nightmare.
Yeah, a few teachers threw some at me, but it just had this incredible mineral aromatic profile.
I agree. I mean, when we tasted it, Brice said afterwards, so what did you think of that? And I sort of said, well, I thought it was very taut, it was very focused, it had this chalky minerality, it was very refined. And he said, sounds like you're describing Pucelle. So, so it does have this very kind of archetypally Puligny character to it, which maybe it hasn't always had in the past. And I think it's really found this poise in the last couple of vintages, which is very...
Well, look, let's get to the nub of it. Brett Smith loved Combat again, or was it also, is he not quite as predictable as normal?
Well, that's also normally my favourite. That's my favourite Premier Cru, and Bienvenue is my favourite Grand Cru from this domain. However, it wasn't my favourite in this vintage. It firmly was last year. My favourite was Pucelle in terms of score. But if I was to say what wine was I drawn to the most, it would be Folatier. And
which can always be a little bit showy sometimes, which is good.
Yeah, so this it was a real sort of flip on its head, wasn't it? The Folatier, for me, and we commented afterwards when we had a chat about it. I said it's quite introvert philosophy for Folatier. So
because
it's sort of slightly in on itself, and that minerality is kind of given this almost slightly more moodier style of personality to when it's all about that florality and it's all about that openness.
It's interesting because I normally have Folatier as sort of a big pocket square and larger lapels, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
it's sort of a little bit showy, a little bit of the extrovert or confidence.
But then onto the palate, then it was the most concentrated of the Premier Crus. Normally I associate almost that sort of richer, weightier style with Combat, but it was broad, and I think we all said it. There was a line at the end which had probably been a tasting note. So I think it was from Adam. He said it's sort of the peacock's tail was folded, but it was brilliant, and I loved it. And I think that's going to be an incredibly interesting Folatier to sort of follow, if you like, bottle by bottle from a case over
I agree. I always think of Folatier taking place kind of in the air. It's a wine of kind of showiness and slight aromatics. And this time, as you say, it was mouth coating. It had a real extract and sort of density and richness to it, which I loved. I don't think it was maybe as peacocked as Adam was hoping, but no, I thought it was wonderful. And then Combat, I did score slightly higher. I think there was that real old vine concentration that you get with Combat. And so but this is a wine that you want to wallow in. It's just sort of so inviting and so lovely.
Again, the limestone here is playing its role, I think, across this vintage in a myriad of ways, because with my nose here, and I know you've got to try and become a bit more creative with tasting so many wines, but I said, the nose is almost oceanic. It's like Pebble Beach. It reminded me of almost Devon, where my parents live. There's Pebble Beaches there, and you go certain mornings, and there's obviously the salt of the sea, and it all just sort of combines. They had that sort of feel, like oyster shell-ish, but
Pebble Beach is a golf course, just so you know.
It is,
anything else. Okay, so Pucelle, sorry, which I mean, along with Chevalier, arguably one of the sort of, I hate the word iconic, but it is. It's the one of the ones most associated with the domain.
Yeah.
And how was it?
Well, I seem to have written Jasmine ! So it was clearly sort of very floral, and then it had this quintessential kind of focused acidity to it. And I mean, it's one that people describe as being a rapier. It's the sort of the long sword that sort of drives through everything, and it definitely did have that character too. Had a little bit of flamboyance on the end as well, which was quite nice. But yeah, very archetypal.
Yeah, absolutely loved it. This was my highest score for Premier Cru. Again, that sort of florality, that white flower, but it's lemon zest, minerality. I said it was a touch oily, but weightless with it. And then this tidal wave of acidity just comes crashing in and brings this joy, which shows the depth, and then this incredibly graceful but long finish. That is, it was a beauty.
Sounds quite aristocratic.
Yeah, good word.
Yeah.
And then on to the Grand Crus, Bienvenue, Bâtard, and Chevalier. Again, so this followed. It's funny, where normally Bienvenue is my absolute where my heart goes. It was the one as my least favourite from that tasting. And I sort of said it was a bit more gregarious than it usually is. And, you know, it's a bit more subdued with the tension and the minerality. The sort of the calcareous component does come through, but it's a little bit flashier, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
But it's supposed to be a welcome.
Well, true. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think this one was flashing more than the ankles. But Batard, wow. I mean, and I'll you'll chip in a moment, you know. I mean, flamboyant as usual form, but the acid richness combination was just perfectly balanced.
No, maybe it's one of
so it feels exuberant, but then it feels incredibly fresh, very charismatic. I thought that was excellent.
Yeah, well, I mean, I generally agree. I think it's amazing you see this step up from what is already an amazingly high Premier Cru level to really another level with the Grand Crus. And you go from the world of finesse and tension into a world which has those things, but also has richness and has decadence. And, you know, the Bienvenue, I described golden fruit and honeyed and honeysuckle and stuff like this. And it's a sunny, warming wine. You know, it has this kind of sense of volume, which you don't necessarily get at Premier Cru level. So I thought that was lovely. And that was marginally my favorite of those two. Batard was also wonderful. I mean, I put that it was a joy giver. It's got that sort of density. Obviously, the really clay heavy soils of Batard do give a different expression as Bouligny Montrachet. And so, you know, either you like that style or you know, for me, what I'm really looking for is that sort of tension and the chalkiness and the minerality. Yeah. You get that less in Batard, but you can't help but love this wine. I mean, it's just such a wonderful, powerful wine. So yeah, both very, very good. But Bienvenue was marginally my favorite.
Would you like to sort of go into the final?
Yeah, and so in terms of the final wine, I mean, this is almost academic when we get to this level because we've got so little of it. But Chevalier 18.5, I scored it. I mean, I thought it was really wonderful wine. It's got more of that sort of fine, chalky minerality. You've got much more limestone in the soil here. It's white peach, white flower, really clipped, really focused, and just sort of reverberates with energy. It's got that real sense of drive, but also has nuance. You know, it's got this sort of real fine texture that you get on the finish, and it just goes on and on. And it was one of the few white wines that I described as having tannin. You know, it's got this sense of real sort of tactile chewability.
Yeah, no, it was for me. This was all about the palate and what it delivered. Because again, in 24, there's a lot of my notes where the nose can be a little bit sort of shy-ish. I think it's just the intensity of the fruit at this early stage for me certainly more consistently came out on the palate more than the nose and across the vintage. But there was definitely here on Chevalier. But I just wrote. I got a little bit of more sort of yellow flower on there, but all of what you were saying, that beautiful fruit expression, purity in the mirror, I just said, you know, the palate has all of this, but it feels like it's just being channeled down a path by rigid chalk cliffs. So much electricity. It was just all of that sort of combination of incredibly complex and beautifully creamy sort of texture. And then I just said it's outstanding with a gloriously devastating long finish. I scored it 19 plus. And then in brackets said, could this get to 19.5? I just said, so concentrated, it's all about the palate. So anyway, it's hardly any of it, so sorry.
6 hectoliters per hectare.
Yeah, no, 6
hectoliters per hectare. Yeah.
Really unhelpful that you like that so much, but there we go.
Yeah,
no, that does sound amazing. We actually spoke not long after you tasted it, I think, on the phone when you were out there, and you were, yes, you did say, oh my Lord, the Chevalier is something else.
Yeah.
I mean, thinking forward to customers, obviously we're going to wrap up in a minute, but where do you put this in terms, and it's a derivative question, so apologies for that, but where do you put this in the pecking order in terms of drinkability? Do you think this will drink before the 22s and 23s? Or do you think it just has a big window? Or just trying to give people a bit of a feel for how they would play vis-a-vis previous vintages?
Yeah, that's a good question. So versus 23, I don't see there being that big of a difference, if I'm honest. The profiles are so different, where 23 obviously is they're sort of bigger wines, but they're sort of, if you think about shapes, they are definitely sort of fuller shapes in every capacity. So sort of rounder, more spherical, but with core energy. specifically for Leflaive. So I think you'll be able to pull corks on that and enjoy that style at a similar sort of time frame as 24. 24's got a little bit more of a restrained nature versus 23. But like we said, there is this combination of sucrosity and acidity that makes it the real charm there. But I think there's going to be much more for those who are interested in that sort of mineral complex component of the wine will enjoy the 24s more. So versus other vintages, yes, versus 22s, I think they'll probably drink sooner than 22s. Given 21s are, a couple of years ahead down the line, depending, I think that will probably be cuvee versus cuvee in 21. There'll be some that probably do drink sooner than 21s, but I suspect some Leflaive 21s will really sort of maybe go into a little bit of a sort of a tighter, coiled, closed component. But, 18 and 19, it's so difficult. We've had 18s, blinded to us from Leflaive, which is that big solar vintage, and a lot of 18 whites, which are coming around in a much more interesting manner now. When we first, 2, 3, 4 years in, there's a little bit of discredit to them. But with Leflaive, that was always the case, that how did they get from such a big solar warm vintage, incredible energy and tension in him. And so for Leflaive, it's a slightly trickier one because it's about that Leflaive component as well.
They're not really representative of so much of the vintage elsewhere.
Yeah.
And even in 18, I remember they made such nervy fine wines, which, sort of on paper should not have been possible from 2018. So it does depend. I wonder how they'll compare to the 17s, for example, because, if you look at the two sort of in inverted commas, great recent white Burgundy vintages of 17 and 14, the 14s were so austere and so sort of, you really, really had to be patient. And in some cases, the 14s are only just beginning to show their colours now. Whereas the 17s never really had that kind of shutdown period. And I think the 17s tended to be quite open and quite inviting off the bat. So maybe 24 will go more along those lines. I think the acidity doesn't feel quite so aggressive. So I suspect they will not shut down and just be quite open and approachable.
Yeah, I agree. I think, in sort of 3-4 years' time, when you're in that lovely space where you're thinking about, should I pull some of these 24 Leflaives out? The ones that you want to put it ahead of will be 22, 20, and some of the 21s. I think 19, 18, 17, you'll be able to just try alongside. Yeah.
Well, that sounds very good.
Yeah.
Obviously rather envious of the tasting, but it is a long one, but it's good.
No, indeed.
Good. No, it was a pleasure. And really good to taste with Amandine as well. So hopefully we'll manage to get her across for a dinner or a tasting or something.
Without going into too much detail, observationally, I enjoyed her confidence, and I enjoyed how she sort of interacted with us, but also with Brice. It was it's nice to see a really good relationship forming there, clearly. And Brice was on very good form. We went out for dinner afterwards with Brice de la Morandière and had a lot of good chat. And it's just I leave that day, and especially after the dinner as well, and having a good sort of chinwag with Brice, just thinking, well, this domaine is in the best hands at the moment. It's been for a long time, and I think that will continue. The quest and pursuit for true brilliance is on show, and 24 is the perfect vintage that kind of allows you to see that amongst challenging conditions.
And we've now had over a decade of that sort of regime as well. If you think it started in 14, it's good.
So we will be. I'm not sure exactly when the podcast will be going out. We're trying to turn it around soon, but the offer will be live from the 10th. You will need to get your orders in with your sort of sales rep certainly by the 16th, or certainly the end of play 16th is what we would like. To ensure that you can get the best chance of what you'd like. But give us a call, phone up. We would love to chat about these wines. The guys are buzzing as well and can't wait to sort of taste them. But anything else you want to add, chaps?
No, that was good. I think
sounds good. Looking forward to selling them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.